It's Kyle here, and today I'll be reviewing The Collapsing Empire by John Scalzi. John Scalzi is definitely one of my favorite sci-fi writers. I would say probably he's my favorite contemporary sci-fi writer, somebody who's still writing today, outside of Star Wars stuff. Always love his books. In fact, honestly, I haven't read one of his books yet that I did not enjoy. I think for me his hallmark is he's extremely funny, so all his books have very humorous moments. But at the same time, the stories don't feel corny. There's still some serious moments, still very interesting sci-fi. I kind of think of it something like, Guardians of the Galaxy or elements of Star Wars, where you can have serious moments, but every once in a while a character like Star-Lord or Han Solo can have a funny line in there to kind of ease the tension a little bit. So I was excited to start reading this series. I actually had this book on my to be read stack for a while, but I was kind of finishing up some other series before I wanted to start a new one. So this is not exactly one of his newest books, but I'm finally got around to starting the first book of the series. And I'm really glad I did. Now, first off, I would say, before I get into the plot a little bit, I would say this book, and I'd heard this before I started reading, leans a little bit more towards the harder sci-fi, and it doesn't have quite as much humorous moments in it as some other of Scalzi's books. Not saying it's not funny, there are some funny lines in here, but it definitely leans more to the serious side, which kind of makes sense when you're kind of reading the storyline. It's a lot of the more the elements it's dealing with is a little bit more serious, and a lot more lives are at stake and stuff like that, so it makes sense that maybe some of the characters are not constantly cutting funny one-liners and stuff like that. But with that being said, still really enjoyed it. Scalzi's such a great writer. He's great at world building. The characters are very interesting. There wasn't really a character that is the focus of this book that I'm like, oh, this really, we have to read about this character again. Can we not get back to the other characters? I find this one boring. Found all the characters very, very interesting. So overall, really enjoyed this book. As for the basic plot, I kind of found it very interesting. So this book focuses on kind of an empire that humanity has created in the galaxy. And basically, at some point in humanity's past, they discovered this element of space called the flow. And it's kind of hard to describe the flow, because even in this book, humanity's scientists really don't know how the flow works. But it's a little bit, I'm just going to compare it to wormholes a little bit. So basically, there's these entry points that they've discovered, and when a ship goes at entry point, it always comes out the other side at the same point, so it doesn't really change. And it basically is kind of like hyperspace. And it's what's really made humanity's ability to travel from planet to planet possible. Humanity does have spaceships, obviously, but they can't really travel at such a speed that they can get to any planets in any remotely short period of time. So the only way that humanity was really able to colonize other planets is through this flow. But the flow can only go to these certain destinations, so humanity cannot create new flows and stuff, so they're kind of stuck where this can kind of go. But it's not really been a big deal. They've created this massive empire that spans all of space. It's absolutely thriving, and it's been going on, I think at this point in the book, I think it's about 1,000 years, so it's been holding steady for a long, long time. As the book starts, and as the name implies, with a collapsing empire, certain individuals start to become aware that the flow seems to be changing, and it might be actually dying. And this is a horrendous event because, as I said earlier, there's no way for humanity to get from planet to planet in their empire without the flow. And if the flow collapses, basically all these planets will be cut off from each other and no way to ever reconnect. It makes it even more serious is the way this empire was set up so that planets wouldn't rebel and stuff like that. That each planet is interdependent on the other planet. So like, I'll just use this as a simplified example. Like, one planet specializes in food, another planet specializes in technology and stuff like that. So the technology planet has to have the food planet survive, because otherwise they don't have enough food to support themselves. So if the flow gets cut off and the technology planet is isolated, it's an entire planet that doesn't really produce enough food for its own population, and before it really have a chance to kind of, develop a food industry, their population would probably starve. So not only is this empire threatened with the prospect of collapse, there's no insurance that all the humanity on all these planets will be able to survive once they're cut off from each other. So that's kind of the basic plot. The characters you're focused on is there's a new empress who just assumes the throne at the beginning of the book. She was never meant to be the leader of the empire. She was a kind of an illegitimate child of the emperor, and his heir that he'd been grooming his entire life to succeed him had died in an accident. So suddenly she is forced upon the throne, and doesn't really feel prepared for it. So you get a lot of the storyline through her perspective. You get some storyline through a kind of a scientist of his family in one of the outer planets who's actually an expert on the flow, and who began to suspect a few decades ago that the flow might be dying, and has been trying to do experiments to figure out if it is, and if so, when, and what can be done about it. You're also getting some perspectives from kind of a rival family to the imperial family who wants to seize power for their own, and they believe the flow is changing but not necessarily collapsing, and they're trying to figure out how to use that for their advantage. And there's some other minor characters spruced in with some other kind of ruling families. Kind of think of elements of kind of like a Game of Thrones, where there's several ruling families and they're kind of squabbling for power and stuff like that. So you're getting a little bit of that as well, in addition to this impending disaster. So I would say if you enjoy sci-fi, especially like a hard sci-fi, I think you'll like The Collapsing Empire. Again, I've only read the first book of the series, so I cannot speak for the rest of the series yet, but the first book I really enjoyed a lot. If you like Scalzi's writing in the past, I think you'll probably enjoy this, but if you primarily like it for his humor and you're not typically as much into sci-fi, you more like Scalzi because she's a funny writer, you might not like this because this book leans more to the sci-fi direction than the humor side. But maybe if you've read Scalzi in the past and you're not really into reading funny books and you want more serious books, this might be a Scalzi book you might want to check out. So anyway, so that is my review for The Collapsing Empire by John Scalzi. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. In the comment section below, let me know who is your favorite contemporary sci-fi writer. I'm always looking for some new sci-fi writers to check out, so maybe I'll learn something new I need to check out. Again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time, and happy reading.